The rain had let up, but the mud still sucked at boots and hope alike. They were standing in the middle of the old timber square, what was once a place for sawdust and wages, now just a skeleton of commerce. 6 crates, 1 mule, and 4 men who smelled like cold rust and old tobacco. That's all the auction drew these days. And her? She stood near the back of the lot, hands tied in front, a brown sack pulled over her head and cinched at the neck with rope. Barefoot, silent, not trembling, just still, like she'd already given herself to something darker than this. Eli Ridge didn't come looking for a woman. He came for nails. Nails, maybe a new bit for his saw, and if prices weren't too bad, a saddle blanket without holes. But when he heard the auctioneer say the next lot was human, he stopped just short of the water trough and turned. Next up, the man called. Unclaimed. No name given. Quiet as smoke. Last found near the river. Someone snorted from the back. Looks like she ain't got a face. Face or no, the auctioneer barked. She can cook, clean, and haul as good as any boy I've seen. That was a lie. He didn't know what she could do. But folks don't bid on women at auctions for their skill sets. Not in towns where names fade before faces. The opening bid was $5. Nobody raised a hand. 3? The man called out, shifting on his heels. Silence. Then a spit. Then 2, Eli said. His voice didn't rise, didn't shake. It was the kind of voice that got trees to listen and rivers to slow down. Sold? The auctioneer coughed, more surprised than pleased. To the lumberjack. God help him. She didn't flinch when he stepped forward. Didn't reach for him. Didn't speak. Just let him untie the rope from her wrists and lead her toward his wagon. The sack still over her head like a secret he'd just agreed to keep. Eli didn't ask her name. Didn't say his. They just rode in silence through the hills, where the pines stood like churchgoers and the sky looked too big to belong to anyone. His cabin sat deep in the woods, for miles past the last fence, 2 miles past where the mail stopped. He didn't open the door for her, just stepped aside and let her walk in. She stood near the hearth, sack still on, fingers touching the mantel. You hungry? He asked. She nodded, slow. He boiled beans, sliced bread, poured water. She ate with her hands, quiet, controlled, like someone who hadn't been fed, but didn't want to be seen needing it. That night, she slept in the corner, near the stove. Eli didn't touch her, didn't even come close. He lay on the cot, arms crossed over his chest, listening to her breathing. It was steady, unafraid, like she'd done this before. By the 3rd day, she was chopping wood out back. He hadn't asked her to, just came out to find her lifting the axe with a rhythm he hadn't seen since his older brother died. She never missed. Each strike landed like punctuation. By the 5th log, Eli set his own saw down and just watched. You ever work timber? He asked. She didn't answer, just picked up the next log and swung again. She cooked that night. Rabbit stew, made with something that smelled like fennel and something else he couldn't place. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. But the taste was good, and the silence around it felt less like avoidance and more like agreement. The sack never came off. Even when she washed by the river, she waited until he was far up the trail before pulling the fabric back just enough to let water run behind it. Eli never peeked. Not once. Not even when the wind lifted the edges while she hung the wash. There was something about the sack, about the way she wore it, that made it holy. Not sacred like a shrine, sacred like grief. Then came the night he found her crying. Not loud, just sitting on the porch, hands over the sack, rocking gently. He didn't say a word, just sat beside her, close enough for her to know he was there, far enough not to break whatever was holding her together. The stars hung low that night, and neither of them slept. A week later, the preacher came riding up the path. Eli hadn't sent for him, but the man came anyway, claiming he was visiting the logging camps. He asked who she was. Eli just said, "She chops wood and makes stew." The preacher laughed nervously. "Don't she have a name?" Eli didn't answer, but she did. For the first time, she stood behind Eli, fingers wrapped around the porch post, and said, clear as glass, Marabeth. Just one word. But it stopped the wind. Even the trees seemed to lean in. The preacher turned. Eli turned. And she lifted the sack. He didn't flinch. Didn't look away. But his hand gripped the porch rail until his knuckles went white. Because what he saw wasn't ugly. Wasn't grotesque. But changed. Marabeth's face had lines no girl her age should carry. A burn along her left jaw. Scars over one cheek. One eye a cloudy gray, the other bright green. But it was the look in those eyes that stopped him. Not shame. Not sorrow. But permission. Like she was letting him decide whether to keep walking. Or stay. Eli stepped forward. One slow step. Then another. He reached up, touched the side of her face, ran his thumb just beneath the burn, and said low and even, "We got wood to split." She smiled. One side of her mouth didn't move right, but the smile reached her good eye, and she said, "Then marry me." The preacher choked on his breath. "Now wait just." But Eli raised a hand. "She asked," he said, and that was that. They married that evening with the wind as witness and the river as choir. No rings. Just hands. No vows. Just eyes. And when the preacher left, shaking his head, Marabeth laid her head against Eli's chest and whispered, "I never thought anyone would pay $2 just to see my name." Eli held her tighter and said, "I paid to bring you home. You gave me everything else for free." The cut was deep. Not jagged like a splinter or a saw nick, but clean, too clean. Right across the meat of Eli's palm. The kind of cut that bled without apology. He didn't cry out when it happened. Didn't even curse. Just looked down at the blood spilling into the sawdust and wrapped it tight in the bottom of his shirt. By the time he made it back to the cabin, he was pale and slow-footed. The color drained from his lips like the last drop from a cracked tin cup. Marabeth was sweeping the hearth. She dropped the broom before it hit the floor and was at his side, pulling the blood-soaked fabric away from his hand. He tried to downplay it. Just a scratch. Sit. One word. She had a way of saying things that made them final. Eli sat at the table while she gathered things. Boiling water, a torn piece of cloth, a small bone-handled knife. He noticed she hadn't reached for the sewing tin. Instead, she sat in front of him, knees folded, and began untying the string from her braid. He watched as she pulled long, dark strands free, gathering them like threads from the earth itself. "Threads in the box," he muttered. "Too thick," she said. Then, more softly, "too unforgiving." She boiled the hair first, strange, maybe, but precise. Then twisted it into a delicate cord, thinner than string but strong enough that it didn't break when pulled tight. Eli winced when she cleaned the wound, his breath catching between clenched teeth. She didn't offer comfort, didn't say it would be all right, just kept working. She stitched him in silence, the thin line of her hair drawing his skin back together like a seam in a torn quilt. Each loop careful, each pull exact. It wasn't a doctor's touch. It was something older, something wilder. When she finished, she didn't speak. Just pressed her lips against the top of his hand, barely a whisper of contact, and began to wrap it in clean cloth. Eli looked down at her as she worked. "You done that before?" She nodded once. "For someone else?" Her hands paused, then continued. "Yes." He didn't ask who. Didn't need to. Some silences carry more truth than answers ever could. That night he couldn't sleep. The pain wasn't bad. It throbbed, sure, but nothing a man like Eli couldn't handle. It was something else that kept him awake. The memory of her kneeling, the quiet intensity in her fingers, the way the cabin had filled with something sacred. Not love, not comfort, but devotion. Not just to him, to life, to survival, to making things whole. He sat up and stoked the fire. She stirred on her cot. "You hurting?" she asked, voice soft from sleep. "No," he said, "just thinking." She sat up slowly, wrapping the quilt around her shoulders, her hair a shadow down her back. "What about?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Why would you use part of yourself to heal me?" Marabeth didn't hesitate. "Because the world already took too much from both of us. I ain't letting it take one more thing. They sat there in the glow of the firelight. No walls between them anymore. Just warmth. And the low hum of something neither could name. When she leaned against his side, he didn't move. He let her rest her head on his good shoulder and watched the flames flicker. You think it'll hold? He asked, nodding toward his hand. She smiled into the dark. Only if you don't pull it apart. Days passed. The stitches held. And so did something else. She started humming when she cooked. Low, sweet tones that reminded him of wind through pine. He started talking more, about things he hadn't said out loud in years. Like the time he almost drowned in the creek trying to pull a mule out of the mud. Or how he used to dream of building a second cabin, one with windows that faced east. She listened, always listened, as if every word mattered, as if the act of speaking was its own kind of healing. One morning, he found her sitting out back, combing through the ends of her hair. Not vanity, care. She was sorting through what remained, choosing what could still be used. What are you doing? He asked. She smiled without turning. Collecting thread. His stomach twisted. You planning on me getting hurt again? No, she said. Then after a beat, planning on staying though. That afternoon, he brought in a bundle of cedar and laid it by the hearth. She glanced up from her stitching. What's that for? New walls, he said. Thought we'd build out the back. She stood slowly, walked to him, took his injured hand and kissed it. It didn't hurt anymore, not even a little. And when she pressed her forehead to his chest, he wrapped both arms around her and said, I don't know what you were before, or who, but you ain't that anymore. She nodded against him. I know. From now on, he whispered, you're stitched into this place. Her voice came low, close. Only way I'd want it. That night, he dreamed of her hair, long and flowing across the floor, weaving between boards, winding up the walls, holding the cabin together like roots. And he didn't wake in fear. He woke smiling, because even the forest needs something strong to keep it from falling apart. The first time Eli heard the voices in the trees, it was late, past midnight, the kind of dark that carried weight, a hush not from silence, but from fear. He stood on the porch, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other, listening to the wind curl through the pines like it had something to say. Then he heard it, clear, deliberate, and cold. Witch, a whisper, then another. Shoulda drowned her when we had the chance. And then laughter, not loud, not amused, cruel. He didn't wake Maribeth, didn't tell her what he'd heard. He just stepped off the porch, eyes scanning the tree line, breath steaming in the cold. No one was there, not that night. But come morning, he found the sign. Burned into a pine trunk not 20 feet from the cabin, low enough for someone on horseback to carve without dismounting. Maribeth is cursed. The bark was still warm. Smoke hung in the air, and near the base of the tree boot prints. 3 different sets. He followed them as far as he could, across the frozen leaves over the ridge, but they vanished near the rocks like phantoms pulled back into the earth. He didn't tell her, but she knew. She was quiet the whole day, too quiet, like something in her had been stirred loose and was trying hard not to spill out. When he sat beside her that night, she was staring into the fire, her hands clenched tight in her lap. Say it, she whispered. Say what? That you believe them, that you've seen me, that you know something's wrong. Eli shook his head. I've seen you make bread. I've seen you cry in your sleep. I've seen you take pain like it's part of the weather. Her voice cracked. They said I hexed the river. That when I was born, my ma died from the screaming. That my daddy hung himself before I could speak. He didn't flinch. And what do you say? She looked up then, eyes burning. I say I survived them. He nodded. That's all I needed to hear. He went out the next morning with his knife and a fresh piece of cedar. He found a new post by the door, smooth, untouched, and began to carve. Not big, not bold, but deep. He spelled it slow, one curl at a time. Marabeth. He carved it with the care of a name meant to last longer than wood. Longer than curses. She saw it that evening. didn't touch it, didn't cry, just stood there, tracing each letter with her eyes like they were the first kind things ever written in her honor. You shouldn't be done that, she said. They'll see it. I won't do. And if they come? He shrugged. Then they come. But they didn't come with fire. They came with whispers, with cold shoulders at the trading post, with silence in the trails. Suddenly, Eli's supplies came late, if they came at all. A man he once split lumber with wouldn't look him in the eye. Even the mail started skipping. One morning he found a dead chicken nailed to a tree, his throat slit, feathers scattered like a warning. Marbeth saw the fear creeping in, not in him but around him, in the land, in the sky, in the way the forest felt tighter, like even the trees were holding their breath. I can leave, she said. No, you'd be safer. I don't want safe. I want you. Her lip trembled. I don't know what I am. You're the woman who saved my hand, who sings when she stirs stew, who remembers the names of birds. She turned her face away. And if they burn the cabin? He touched her chin and made her look at him. They can burn everything but your name, and I already carved that in. That night, a torch was thrown through the window. Eli rolled off the cot before the glass hit the floor. Marbeth was faster. Bucket in hand, flames doused before they touched the curtain. He ran outside barefoot, rifle raised. 3 riders in the dark. Cowards. He didn't fire, but he didn't lower the barrel either. One of them spat. You sleep next to a witch, you wake up cursed. Eli's voice was steady. You come back again, I won't wait for curses. I'll settle it myself. The riders backed into the trees, and were gone. The next day, Eli packed the wagon. He wasn't leaving. He was building 2 cabins. One for living, one for protection. He stacked rock, laid traps, raised fences. And Marbeth? She planted, laid down herbs in the corners of the windows, strung crow feathers above the doorway. Not for hexes, for reminders that she'd once been hunted, but not anymore. Then one morning something changed. A little girl from the settlement came walking through the trees, no older than 8, holding a wooden doll missing an arm. She stood at the edge of the clearing and called out, Is the lady here? Marbeth stepped forward, unsure. The girl held out the doll. Can you fix her? Her voice was so hopeful, so innocent. It undid something in the air. Marbeth knelt, took the doll. Come back tomorrow. The girl nodded, and left. When she came back, the doll had both arms, and a dress, and hair stitched from Marbeth's own trimmings. The girl hugged her, didn't flinch at the scar on her cheek, didn't ask about the sack, just smiled and said, You're pretty. That night, Eli took Marbeth's hand and led her to the door. He pointed at the carving. Next week, he said, I'll carve it again, deeper. Why? So it'll outlast us both. She traced the letters again, this time with her fingertip. You really believe names matter that much? Eli leaned in. I believe yours does. She turned to him then, and whispered, Then maybe it's time I started believing it too. And somewhere, deep in the pines, the wind began to whisper something new. Not curses, not warnings, but a name. Marbeth, carved in cedar, carried in love, built to endure. The night had been still. No wind, no coyotes, just the kind of quiet that settled too hard, too thick, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Eli slept on his side, one hand hanging off the cot, the other curled beneath the pillow where the revolver always waited. Marbeth lay across from him, back to the wall, her breath slow, steady, until it wasn't. He didn't see it happen. He only heard it. His name, torn from her throat like it was being dragged out against her will. Eli. He was up before the echo even faded, barefoot, cold. But when he turned, her side of the bed was empty. The door was open, wide. No signs of struggle, no tracks, just the hush, and the sack, the one she never touched anymore. It hung limp from a nail by the stove, untouched since the last thaw. But she was gone. He stepped outside and called for her. Mara Beth. No answer. Only his own voice coming back, thin and weak. Mara Beth. Still nothing. He grabbed his boots and coat, didn't bother with gloves. Rifle in one hand, lantern in the other, he started down the trail, heart hammering like it hadn't since the war. She hadn't gone far. He knew her steps. He knew her. But something in the air felt wrong. The woods swallowed light. Lantern barely reached 10 feet ahead. Trees hunched like they were watching. Then he heard it again. A sound not like a woman. Not like an animal either. A low, keening whimper. He turned toward it, boots sinking into the wet ground, the trail giving way to roots and pine needles. He found her kneeling by the creek, nightgown soaked, hair plastered to her back. Her hands were buried in the water, unmoving, like she'd been there a long time, like she hadn't noticed the cold at all. He dropped to his knees beside her. Mara Beth, what happened? She didn't look at him, didn't speak, just kept staring at her own hands under the water like they belonged to someone else. He reached for her wrists, ice cold, and pulled them free. They were trembling, but not from the cold, from memory. She looked at him then, eyes empty. I was dreaming, she said. Okay. I was back there. He didn't have to ask where there was. She told him once, barely, through cracked words and silence. A barn. A woman in white. Men who drank and bet and didn't ask names. I was back there, but I wasn't me. He pulled her close, wrapped the coat around her. You're here now. I saw my mother, she whispered. Eli stilled. She was singing. She used to hum when she brushed my hair. I forgot that. I forgot her voice. But tonight, she looked up at him. She was crying, and she said I left her there, that she was still waiting. They sat in silence by the creek. The sun had begun to rise, just barely, a pale orange rim cresting the trees. He stood and lifted her gently, like you might lift something broken, something precious. Carried her back, step by slow step, boots squelching through the thawing earth. He laid her down on the cot, started a fire, boiled water, made tea. She didn't speak for a long time, and when she did, it wasn't a confession. It was a decision. I want to go back. He turned from the stove. To where? To where it started. Where I was taken from. Eli's jaw tightened. No. I need to see if she's there. She's not. You said yourself. She is. Her voice cracked. If I'm dreaming it, she's not free. They didn't argue. Not really. He saw the resolve in her eyes, and he knew this wasn't something to fight. So he packed the wagon, loaded supplies, made sure the revolver was clean and ready. They left at dawn, 2 days through the foothills, a stretch of land he hadn't crossed in years. The closer they got, the quieter she became, until finally, she pointed to a hill. There. No path, no markers, just a slope of dead grass and twisted trees. They climbed on foot, the wagon left behind. At the top, the barn, gray, hollow, collapsed in the back, but still standing, like it had been waiting too. She didn't hesitate, pushed open the door with both hands, stepped into the dark. He followed, every nerve in his body tight, every sense on fire. Inside, nothing but dust, and chains, rusted, slack. He saw her flinch, then step toward the far wall. There, under the boards, something wrapped in cloth. She knelt and peeled it back. Bones, small, fragile, a necklace beside it, string and shell. She gasped. My mother's. She buried them with her hands. No shovel, no words, just dirt and breath and salt. Eli stood beside her, head low, the sky above going gray. And when she stood again, her face was clean, washed in grief, but clean. They left the barn behind, didn't speak for hours. Not until the cabin came into view again, warm light flickering in the windows. That night, she took the sack from the nail, folded it, placed it in the fire, watched it burn. Eli didn't say a word, just pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. She leaned into him, whispered, I don't hear her crying anymore. Who? My mother. She looked up at him. She's humming again. And that night, for the first time, she slept without waking. And he watched her, knowing some ghosts don't need exorcism, just burial. And some names, once spoken aloud, lose their power forever. They didn't say her name in town anymore. Not at the post. Not at the mill. Not even whispered behind hands the way they used to. Folks who once spit the name like poison now acted like it had never existed at all. Children who once pointed and called her the sack woman now looked through her like fog. And Eli knew that was how forgetting worked. Quiet, gradual, a kind of slow erasure. But the forest didn't forget. Not the trees, not the wind, not the soil she walked barefoot across each morning before sunrise. Marabeth hadn't spoken much since the trip to the barn. She didn't need to. She moved different now. Not lighter exactly, but with purpose. She planted rosemary along the fence posts, hung bells on the porch, started each morning boiling leaves he didn't recognize and setting the steam by the windows. When Eli asked why, she just said, "So they remember I'm still here." He didn't know if she meant the people or the forest. One morning, just after the frost had lifted, Eli woke to find her gone again. But this time he didn't panic. He stepped out the front door, looked toward the woods, and waited. A few minutes later he saw her. In the trees, kneeling, speaking to someone. No, not someone. Something. She had her hand on the base of an old pine. One he hadn't seen her near before, and her lips moved like she was praying. But not in the way church folk did. There was no desperation in it. Just rhythm. Like she was remembering. He waited until she returned. She sat beside him, dusted her skirt and said, "I told it I forgave them." Eli raised a brow. The people? No. The trees. She looked up at the canopy, golden and rustling. They watched it all. Every lash, every silence, every man who walked past. And they didn't stop it. Eli said nothing. Then she added softly, "But they held me after." And somehow he understood. She started making things. Bundles of root and stone, wrapped in twine. Hung them along the eaves, buried a few under the porch. One she set by his bedside. For what? Protection. From what? From forgetting. He touched her face then, gently. "I won't." She smiled. But it was the kind of smile that knew the truth. Someday even the strongest memories fade. That's why she made the bundles. That's why she carved. A week later, a rider came to the cabin. Eli saw the dust trail long before the knock. Young man, dusty coat, hat too big for his head. "'Excuse me, sir," he said. "Looking for a woman. Heard there was one out here used to wear a sack." Eli stared. "What for?" The boy shifted. "She saved my sister. In a storm. Out near Dry Fork. Don't know her name. Just said she had soft hands and eyes like smoke." Eli stepped back. Called inside. "Marabeth." She came out slow. The boy's eyes went wide. Then soft. "That's her." He reached into his satchel. Pulled out a handkerchief. Hand-stitched. With a rose. "She made this. Gave it to my sister to calm her while she was sick. My ma said we ought to return it." Marabeth took the cloth gently. Held it for a long time. Then folded it. "Tell your mother. I remember her kindness." The boy tipped his hat. "Ma'am." Then rode off. That night, Eli watched her sit under the stars, the handkerchief in her lap. "You think the forest will remember me?" she asked. He nodded. "Long after I'm gone?" "Especially then." She looked toward the dark hills. "Then maybe I can stop needing the rest of them too." Years passed. The cabin weathered storms, frosts, droughts, but the name carved in the doorway stayed sharp, clear, unfaded. Marabeth. When the time came, she didn't ask for a preacher, didn't ask for a box. She just said, "Bury me near the pine." And Eli did, hands shaking, heart split. He wrapped her in the quilt she loved, laid her down gentle, and covered her in the same soil she used to whisper to. Afterward, he didn't speak much, but the forest did. In the weeks that followed, new shoots rose from her grave. Flowers he'd never seen before, pale lavender, tall and soft. The trees above bent inward, like sheltering her, protecting, remembering. And sometimes, when he sat there long enough, he'd swear he heard her voice in the wind. Not crying, not calling, just humming. Years later, strangers would walk through the forest and pause. "There's something about this place," they'd say. They'd linger longer by the tall pine with the lavender beneath it. They'd feel warmer there, watched maybe but not threatened. And somewhere, just behind the wind, they'd hear a name, not shouted, not even spoken, just carried. Maribeth, the one the world forgot, but the forest always knew.